Our story begins as reinforced glass shatters inward with a deafening roar, scattering jagged shards across the floor of his 20th floor apartment, all while a massive green tendril bursts into the living room. Thorns the size of hunting knives cover the pulsating surface of the invasive plant, tearing through the drywall as it expands. While he presses his back against the cold concrete pillar, he has exactly 3 seconds before the snapping jaws of this chlorophyll monster reach his throat. As every escape route is blocked by toxic vines oozing a highly corrosive sap, hardly an ideal Tuesday, to be honest. His pulse races as his analytical biology student's brain automatically calculates the tensile strength of the attacking fiber and concludes that physical resistance would mean certain death. The monstrous alpha predator pulls back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coils back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coils back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coils back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coils back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coils back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. The monstrous alpha predator coiled back to launch its blade. But it still left him in a fatal resource deficit, a rather precarious position, to say the least. There were only 7 minutes left on the timer before the vine would snap his neck. And so, he shifted his focus to the outside world visible through the frame of the completely shattered window. 3 large mutant pigeons rested on the edge of the adjacent balcony, completely unaware of the alpha predator frozen inside the apartment and presenting a perfect, dense package of meat. By calculating the biomass yield of a complete avian body, he realized that capturing just one bird would provide enough energy to keep the defensive system running for at least 12 hours. Harvesting a living creature was a minor ethical violation, perhaps, but his pragmatism easily overrode any residual social morality when faced with the mathematical certainty of his own death. He mentally directed the armored vine to extend a secondary tendril and slide it silently along the exterior concrete wall, approaching the huddled birds. The moment the creature slid forward, it did so without triggering their flight. The massive green appendage moved with terrifying precision, firmly wrapping around the nearest target before violently crushing its skeletal structure in one swift, mechanical motion. The system immediately recognized the dense organic matter and requested an extraction sequence, using the vine's microscopic thorns to drain the fresh blood and muscle tissue. We see the interface numbers skyrocket as the extraction process carries on. He added an impressive 0.8 units of biomass to his depleted digital reserve, resolving the crisis in an instant. His new balance of 0.83 units funded the maintenance of his defensive network for over 16 hours, providing the necessary capital to secure the breach perimeter. He ordered the vine to weave its thick body through the broken window frame, creating a solid barricade of poisonous thorns that effectively sealed his apartment off from the outside world. The moment the creature slid into place, the movement consumed 0.02 units of biomass, a small price to pay, all things considered. But the structural integrity of the living wall guaranteed that nothing else from the mutated sky could enter his safe zone today. Establishing a secure base required a continuous generation of resources, so he programmed the barricade to act as a passive trap for any flying insects or small birds. Each trapped insect provided a microdose of 0.001 units, slowly creating a steady stream of income, which offset the permanent maintenance drain of the heavy plant. A clever bit of biological accounting, really. He analyzed the remaining dead roots of the ficus and realized he could use his knowledge of biology to modify their cellular structure, forcing them to grow toward the apartment's ventilation duct. By pumping 0.1 units of biomass into the dead roots, he stimulated aggressive cell division, causing thin white threads of mycelium to crawl toward the dark metal ducts above him. This investment created his first sensory network, allowing him to detect microvibrations and sound waves traveling through the building's infrastructure from the lower floors. His territory was secured for the moment, but his aggressive harvesting had not gone unnoticed by the outside environment. We see his new sensors pick up heavy footsteps moving far below him. It seems he wasn't as alone as he thought. A localized vibration pattern indicated humans were gathering on the ground level, pointing weapons toward his green window, which meant his survival had just attracted a new kind of attention and perhaps a much greater threat. As his sensory network detected the vibrations of the armed group below, he immediately calculated the structural integrity of his position on the 20th floor against potential ballistic threats. The reinforced concrete floors provided adequate protection against small arms fire, but a direct assault via the stairs remained a statistically high probability. He estimated he had roughly 40 hours before things became truly complicated. And in this world, 40 hours is a lifetime. Defending a fixed location required a continuous generation of biomass, so he turned his attention back to the shattered window, where his living barricade was actively trapping mutated flying insects. Each captured bug produced exactly 0.001 units of biomass, an extremely inefficient conversion rate to sustain a heavy combat asset like the piercing vine. To be honest, it was barely a drop in the bucket. He needed a high-yield resource cycle to fund the expansion of his base, so he ordered the vine to extend 3 thin hunting tendrils outside. The first task was to sweep the building's exterior concrete wall in search of more substantial prey. The system interface projected the energy cost of this active hunting protocol at 0.02 units per hour, forcing him to operate under a strict time limit to ensure a positive return on his investment. A mutated crow with a wingspan of nearly 2 meters landed on the air conditioning unit of the 19th floor, completely unaware of the green sensory vines descending slowly down the gray concrete toward it. He analyzed the target and estimated its biological density could provide at least 1.2 units of biomass, which would easily cover his maintenance costs and leave a considerable energy surplus. A very profitable bird, indeed. He activated the attack sequence, and the 3 tendrils lunged forward with terrifying speed, wrapping around the massive bird and crushing its wings before it could emit a single alarm call. The extraction process began immediately, dissolving the avian muscle tissue and clearing the catch. As the hunt concluded, the remains were converted into raw liquid energy that flooded his system, raising his total reserve to 1.9 units of biomass. This successful hunt established a viable economic cycle where he spent a small amount of energy on exterior wall sweeps to capture heavy mutated birds, generating massive profits for his core defensive network. It was a clever bit of biological accounting. He spent the next 6 hours repeating this exact hunting protocol, capturing 4 more large avian targets and steadily increasing his digital currency. By the time he was finished, his reserves had accumulated to an unprecedented 5.6 units. Hoarding resources without investing them was a tactical error, so he opened the symbiont's mutation menu to upgrade his primary weapon before the armed group below decided to act. He knew he needed to initiate a vertical breach, but while the piercing vine possessed incredible attack speed, its soft cellular structure left it vulnerable to blades or the sustained fire of any coordinated group of human attackers. To be honest, it was a bit of a glass cannon. Using his academic knowledge of biology, he selected the specific genetic sequence responsible for lignin production, intending to radically harden the outer epidermal layer of his green monster. It was time to give it some proper armor. The system calculated the cost of this structural mutation at exactly 3.0 units of biomass, leaving him with a projected balance of 2.6 units once the upgrade was complete. He authorized the transaction without a second thought, watching the digital numbers drop as a violent biological transformation surged through the massive plant. The vine's bright green surface darkened rapidly, turning into a dense, brownish-gray bark, while the piercing thorns thickened into heavy armored plates that looked more like solid wood than flexible tissue. He decided to test this new tensile strength by ordering the mutated appendage to strike the remaining concrete pillar, and we see it shatter the edge of the solid stone without suffering any visible cellular damage whatsoever. This armored upgrade reduced the plant's flexibility by about 15%, but it increased its blunt trauma capacity and cut resistance by an incredible 400%. His primary weapon was now a lethal battering ram, capable of crushing human bone and smashing through tactical shields, which significantly tilted the power dynamic in favor of his isolated defensive position. A very wise investment, indeed. He then used the newly hardened vine to completely seal the broken window frame, weaving the armored segments together to create an impenetrable wooden vault door that blocked all outside lines of sight. Securing the physical perimeter was only the first step of base management, so he redirected 0.5 units of biomass to expand the white mycelium sensory network he had planted in the air ducts. The fungal threads accelerated their growth, crawling through the metal ventilation shafts and spreading across the ceiling panels of the 19th and 18th floors, directly beneath his secure apartment. Imagine having ears in every wall. That was his goal. Processing the incoming sensory data required intense mental concentration as the world below began to reveal its secrets to him. As the microvibrations began to sketch a rough topographical map of the lower levels directly onto his cerebral cortex through the system link, he detected the skittering patterns of mutated rodents and the slow movements of predatory insects, but found no immediate human thermal signatures on the 2 levels closest to his territory. Maintaining this expanded sensory network near the window zone was proving to be quite a drain. The sheer number of insects he encountered meant an additional 0.1 units of biomass were needed every hour, making his system's general maintenance significantly more expensive. He felt forced to optimize his passive traps by secreting a localized pheromone from the vines of the barricade, specifically designed to lure high-mass insect species directly toward his extraction thorns. The pheromone lure cost 0.2 units to synthesize, but it immediately boosted the passive insect capture rate by 60%. This created a much more stable income base for his energy economy. A smart move, all things considered. He calculated that his current resource generation could indefinitely sustain the armored vine and the sensory network, provided the local mutated fauna remained relatively stable. The internal mechanics of his base were running smoothly, but he knew that relying solely on internal sensors was a fatal blind spot. And so, he moved toward the small remaining gap in his armored window barricade to peer outside. He picked up his old camping binoculars from the dusty floor and adjusted the lenses to scan the ruined cityscape stretching out beneath his elevated fortress, searching for the source of the vibrations. The city below was an expansive jungle of decaying concrete and aggressive overgrowth, with massive roots tearing through the asphalt and crushing the rusted remains of abandoned civilian vehicles. He shifted his attention to the adjacent commercial building, situated roughly 200 meters across the ruined street. There, he noticed a suspicious absence of wild mutated flora on its middle floors. As he zoomed in on the 10th floor of the opposite structure, he caught a glint of sunlight reflecting off a polished metallic surface hidden deep in the shadows of a shattered corporate window. His analytical mind immediately recognized the reflection pattern as a high-powered optical lens, confirming his worst tactical suspicion. To be honest, he had been expecting company eventually. A hostile entity was actively watching his elevated position. He held his breath and steadied the binoculars, identifying 3 distinct human figures moving within the dark office space, clearly outfitted with military-grade tactical gear and heavy crossbow weaponry. The group's leader was a massive man with a scarred face who, at that very moment, was pointing directly toward his 20th floor apartment, while speaking aggressively into a portable shortwave radio transmitter. The gunmen across the street retreated slightly as they observed the massive armored vine weaving itself into his window frame. Realizing that his apartment wasn't just an overgrown ruin, but a fortress, their initial shock quickly transformed into predatory interest as they analyzed the sheer density of biological resources concentrated in one spot and calculated the potential loot value of his base. To be honest, it was a tempting target. We see the scarred leader make a violent gesture to his subordinates, ordering them to pack up the observation gear and secure their weapons for what was clearly an imminent mobilization. The threat parameters had changed fundamentally, because these weren't irrational monsters driven by hunger, but calculating human scavengers capable of using fire and explosives to breach his defensive walls. His armored vine could easily crush a human skull, but it was highly susceptible to incendiary damage, meaning a coordinated assault with Molotov cocktails could completely incinerate his primary defensive asset, which, naturally, was a terrifying thought. He checked the system interface and noted that his available biomass had regenerated to 1.8 units, thanks to the passive insect traps and the remaining avian extraction process finishing its cycle. He needed to develop a countermeasure against fire-based attacks immediately, so he opened the mutation menu and began researching chemical compounds capable of neutralizing high-temperature combustion. His future, after all, was the future of biomass. His biology background provided him with the exact molecular formula for a fire-retardant biological slime produced by certain deep-sea organisms, which, in theory, he could splice into the vine's genetic code. The system verified the theoretical viability of the mutation, but set a massive synthesis cost of 5.0 biomass units, which meant that, at that precise moment, he was still 3.2 units short of what he needed to survive. This massive economic deficit forced him to abandon his passive defense and initiate an aggressive over-harvesting protocol, completely ignoring the long-term ecological stability of the building's surrounding exterior. He ordered the armored vine to extend every available sensory route outside the building, searching for any organic mass larger than a rat, and initiating immediate lethal extraction upon any detection. To be honest, it was a brutal necessity. The heavy vine scraped against the concrete, tearing away huge chunks of wild moss and crushing dozens of small parasitic plants, all to squeeze out every microscopic fraction of available energy. His biomass counter rose slowly from 1.8 to 2.4, while this desperate harvesting operation stripped the entire exterior wall of his floor, completely bare of any competing biological life. We see the scarred leader from the opposite building stop packing his gear, staring in absolute disbelief through his lenses as he witnesses the green vines systematically devouring the surrounding flora. His expression shifted from predatory confidence to deep tactical concern, realizing he wasn't just watching a simple mutant plant, but a highly coordinated and intelligent engine of biological consumption. He didn't care about the man's psychological reaction. His only priority was reaching that 5.0 biomass threshold before the assault team could cross the street and breach the lobby, which, naturally, was a race against time. Just then, a massive mutated flying squirrel miscalculated its gliding trajectory and landed directly on his cleared exterior wall, presenting a dense target worth at least 2 full units of precious biological currency. He activated a maximum speed attack sequence, draining 0.1 units of energy to force the armored vine to move faster than its mass should physically allow, snapping the creature in half. The rapid extraction process pumped fresh nutrients into his digital reserve, raising his total balance to a painfully close 4.6 units. All while the human threat continued its grim preparations. And so, the tension only continued to mount. He needed 0.4 units immediately, so he turned his attention toward the interior of the apartment, evaluating the remaining non-essential organic materials scattered throughout his ruined living room. His own leather jacket hanging on the chair and the cotton mattress in the bedroom represented complex carbon structures that the system could technically break down into usable raw energy. Without any problem, that was simply how it was forced to function. He ordered the secondary vines to consume his bedding and clothing, sacrificing his basic human comforts for the mathematical certainty of tactical survival. Against the approaching hostile unit of scavengers, the roots dissolved the fabric and leather, converting the processed materials into exactly 0.5 units of biomass and raising his total reserve to the necessary 1 units of currency. He immediately executed the fireproof mutation protocol. We see the armored vine begin to secrete a thick, translucent mucus, coating its hardened wooden plates with a shiny protective layer. This thermal defensive upgrade reduced his balance back down to 0.1 units, leaving him incredibly vulnerable to any physical damage that might pierce the armor. Since he had no energy left for cellular repair, he was operating on a razor-thin economic margin, where one miscalculated blow or a failed capture attempt, for which he had no resources, would trigger the complete systemic collapse of his entire defensive network in a matter of minutes. The enemy team finished their preparations and vanished into the depths of their commercial building, indicating they were likely descending to street level to begin their crossing maneuver. He calculated their travel time through the ruined streets at approximately 20 minutes, which gave him a very narrow window to prepare the lower floors for their inevitable attempt at a violent intrusion. He began to push his sensory network deeper into the building's infrastructure to track their vertical ascent. But expanding the mycelium threads required biomass that he completely lacked at that moment. Finally, his passive insect traps activated simultaneously, capturing a swarm of mutated locusts that produced a sudden spike of 0.3 units. And raised his critical balance to 0.4. It wasn't much, but it was a start. He invested every fraction of that new capital into the fungal threads, forcing them to dig aggressively until the very end. He moved down through the elevator shafts until he reached the 16th floor to establish a warning perimeter. The sensory network stretched to its absolute physical limit, feeding him a constant flow of microvibrations that painted a chaotic image of the dark concrete corridors, located 4 levels below his base. His preparations were interrupted by a new, unexpected piece of data when the fungal sensors on the 16th floor detected a rhythmic metallic tapping that didn't match the chaotic noise of the monsters. The rhythmic pattern was a deliberate code, confirming the existence of another human survivor trapped directly in the path of the hostile assault team, forcing him to face a massive tactical dilemma. The rhythmic metallic tapping vibrating through his extended fungal sensory network contradicted every known biological movement pattern of the mutated predators roaming the lower floors. He calculated the acoustic trajectory and confirmed that the localized fungal sensory source originated exactly 4 levels below his fortified position, placing the anomaly securely on the 16th floor. His immediate tactical priority remained the heavily armed scavenger team preparing to breach the ground floor lobby. But this artificial acoustic signature introduced a new strategic variable. An intelligent survivor represented a potentially massive asset because his biological capabilities were strictly limited to organic manipulation and left all mechanical systems completely useless. To be honest, he needed a pair of hands. Initiating a rescue operation required extending a physical transport vine down through 4 layers of reinforced concrete, which would demand a massive expenditure of his accumulated biomass. He checked his current reserve, which sat at a precarious 0.4 units, and realized that drilling through the floors would consume at least 0.3 units, leaving him highly vulnerable. Investing 75% of his entire capital into an unknown asset was a critical mathematical risk. But fighting an armed tactical unit without electrical traps guaranteed death. And who could blame him for choosing the gamble? Pragmatism dictated that securing a technical specialist was worth the immediate energy deficit, so he authorized the creation of a specialized structural breaching vine. He allocated 0.1 units of biomass to mutate the tip of the new vine into a dense, rotating biological drill, coating it with the highly corrosive acid he had previously discovered outside. The drill attacked the concrete floor of his apartment, creating a localized high-frequency vibration, while the acid dissolved the binding agents and the hardened would ground the stone to dust. Drilling through the first 20-inch layer of reinforced floor consumed 0.05 units of biomass. reducing his total reserve to a dangerously low 0.25 units. The vine broke through the ceiling of the 19th floor and encountered a swarm of nesting mutated spiders, which, as it turned out, presented a perfect opportunity to offset his heavy excavation costs. He immediately deployed extraction microspines along the descending vine's stem, impaling 40 spiders in 3 seconds and converting their fluids into 0.08 units. This small injection of resources raised his balance to 0.33 units, allowing him to sustain the downward drilling operation without driving his defensive network into total bankruptcy. The biological drill hit the concrete slab of the 19th floor and resumed its corrosive rotation, devouring the rebar with terrifying efficiency and loud metallic screeches. The hostile scavenger unit advancing through the street would undoubtedly hear the structural noise, but stealth was mathematically irrelevant when calculating the basic odds of their eventual downfall. The drill pushed through to the 18th floor, costing another 0.05 units, while the sensory network detected a large mutated rodent attempting to bite the exposed vine. He ordered the vine to contract rapidly, snapping the 50-pound rodent's spine and instantly extracting 0.15 units of dense biological currency from the fresh carcass. His biomass balance stabilized at 0.43 units, proving that aggressive resource harvesting during the day was a sound strategy. He realized he could completely subsidize the massive cost of the rescue operation this way. The vine continued its vertical descent and breached the 17th floor without encountering any biological resistance, which meant, unfortunately, that he was losing the chance to harvest any additional local energy. He initiated the final drilling sequence through the ceiling of the 16th floor, consuming another 0.05 units and bringing his reserve down to 0.38. The hardened biological drill finally broke through the last layer of the 17th floor, emerging into a dark corridor right where that rhythmic metallic tapping originated. We see him expand his mycelium network over the new surface, mapping the immediate surroundings and detecting a heavily barricaded steel door, which was completely surrounded by a series of rudimentary electric traps. The traps used repurposed car batteries connected to frayed copper wires, indicating the survivor possessed significant mechanical engineering skills, making them, as it turned out, a very valuable asset indeed. Bypassing the electric traps required precise manipulation, so he sprouted 3 microtendrils from the main vine to delicately trace the copper wiring back to its power source. He spent 0.01 units to secrete a non-conductive resin over the exposed battery terminals, completely neutralizing the lethal voltage without ever triggering the rudimentary alarm system. The metallic tapping stopped abruptly, indicating the survivor inside had noticed the structural dust falling from the ceiling and was adopting a defensive combat stance. He needed to establish communication without causing a panic, so he shaped the tip of the vine into a blunt manipulator and gently tapped a sequence of prime numbers against the steel door. The mathematical pattern of the knocks was a universally recognizable sign of human intelligence, designed specifically to differentiate his biological appendage from a mindless mutant predator. The survivor inside paused for exactly 12 seconds before returning a corresponding sequence of prime numbers, confirming they understood the logic and were currently evaluating the level of threat. He manipulated the door's locking mechanism, forcing a hardened microroot into the lock and expanding its cell density until the internal bolts gave way under the immense pressure. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing a young teenage girl who was clutching a lamp, wielding an improvised electrified spear and wearing goggles fashioned from broken smartphone screens and gray duct tape. We see the young survivor staring in absolute terror at the massive armored tentacle hovering in her doorway, waiting for it to strike. But he maintained absolute rigidity to demonstrate perfect, calculated control. She raised her electrified weapon, aiming it at the central mass of the vine, while her racing heart rate was clearly registered through microvibrations, which traveled through his sensory network in the floor. He needed to execute an immediate psychological override to prevent her from damaging his asset, so he located an empty plastic water bottle on a nearby overturned office desk. He ordered the heavy armored vine to perform a high-precision maneuver, extending a single delicate green leaf to gently wrap around the plastic cylinder without crushing its fragile walls. The massive biological weapon moved with a terrifying grace, closing the distance between them and softly presenting the water bottle directly into her trembling, tech-covered hand, which, to be honest, was the last thing she expected. This demonstration of absolute fine motor control completely shattered her understanding of the mutated world, causing her to drop the electrified spear as she registered the reality of his consciousness. Her face shifted from primal fear to profound shock upon realizing that the alpha predator invading her sanctuary was acting as a delivery mechanism. He had no vocal cords in that location, so he used a nearby puddle of spilled motor oil to write a single, calculated message on the tiled floor, using the tip of his armored vine as a pen. The thick black letters spelled out a highly pragmatic transaction, offering physical protection and organic sustenance in direct exchange for her mechanical and electrical maintenance skills. She read the oily text twice over before slowly nodding, indicating her acceptance of the survival contract and establishing his first official subordinate within this expanding biological hierarchy. We see that her name tag reads Micah, confirming her identity, while he immediately calculated the increased caloric requirements needed to sustain a second human metabolism within his main base. And so, our little family begins to grow. A standard human required approximately 2,000 daily calories, which meant he would have to divert about 0.4 kilograms of daily calories. This meant his wife's body had to divert around 0.2 units of biomass per day just to synthesize edible protein structures. This metabolic tax was a heavy burden, to be sure, but her ability to restore the building's electrical grid would exponentially multiply the lethality of his defensive network against the approaching looters. He ordered the vine to wrap firmly around Micah, forming a protected biological harness designed to hoist her 70 kilograms body vertically through the shaft. Lifting her dead weight consumed 0.08 units of biomass, which was quite a steep price to pay in the moment. This reduced his current digital reserve to a dangerously low 0.29 units, just before the imminent battle. The extraction process was highly efficient, taking exactly 40 seconds to pull her through 4 layers of concrete and deposit her safely in his ruined main room. Micah stumbled upon landing, but we see her immediately begin scanning the heavily fortified apartment. She analyzed the armored barricades and the central biological mass with an evident sense of technical fascination. He wasted no time on social pleasantries and pointed directly to a salvaged portable generator sitting in the corner. It was something he was physically incapable of repairing with his current set of organic skills. She understood the immediate tactical need, dropped her heavy toolbox, and ran toward the broken machine. She began dismantling the engine casing with a speed that more than justified his investment of resources. While Micah attempted to unload the engine, he worked tirelessly to restore the electrical supply. He turned his attention back to the external sensory network and detected that the hostile team of looters had managed to breach the ground floor. The heavy thud of military boots echoed through the lower concrete stairs, confirming the enemy was avoiding the disabled elevators. They began their slow vertical ascent toward his base. He tracked their progress, estimating they would reach the 10th floor in about 8 minutes. This gave him a very brief window to finalize the integration, a tight schedule, even for a consciousness like his. Micah managed to bypass the generator's burnt ignition coil, routing a secondary wire directly to the spark plug and pulling the cord. She handled the startup with a practiced mechanical efficiency that was honestly impressive to behold. The combustion engine roared to life, sending a steady stream of raw electricity through the cables she had hastily connected to a series of car batteries, which had been discarded against the cracked wall. Meanwhile, he had already harvested dozens of poisonous nettles from the exterior walls. He handed Micah a bundle of these toxic vines, gesturing for her to connect them directly to the battery pack. Her engineering logic synchronized perfectly with his biological manipulation as she wrapped exposed copper wire around the conductive sap glands of the nettles, effectively creating active stun traps throughout the area. We see them establish a clear division of labor. He controlled the structural placement of the vines while she managed the electrical voltage, creating a highly lethal, techno-organic hybrid perimeter, a desperate defense for desperate times. He spent 0.1 units of biomass to accelerate the growth of the wired nettles, extending them across the main hallway leading to his apartment door, until the floor was completely covered, though this defensive expense reduced his reserve to a mere 0.19 units. However, the resulting electric trap was mathematically guaranteed to incapacitate the first wave of human attackers. The sensory network indicated that the team of looters had just reached the 15th floor, meaning they were only 5 levels below us now, moving with significantly more tactical caution as they continued their ascent. Their scarred leader used a thermal scanner to sweep the stairs, unaware that his cold-blooded plant networks registered the exact same temperature as the walls. Micah accessed a rusted switchbox in the corridor and successfully redirected power from their generator to the emergency lighting system, illuminating the designated kill zone with a harsh, flickering yellow glow that felt appropriately ominous. He ordered the armored vine to retract slightly from the window barricade, positioning its heavy impact mass directly in front of the apartment door, ready to act as the ultimate kinetic hammer when the moment finally arrived. Opening the barricade cost 0.02 units, leaving him with 0.17, barely enough energy to sustain a single high-speed combat strike. Micah crouched behind an overturned reinforced concrete desk, waiting for the inevitable confrontation to begin. She gripped an improvised switch that controlled the voltage flow to the toxic nettle field, waiting for his signal to close the circuit. The first hostile scout breached the 20th floor stairwell, moving with slow, deliberate steps while scanning the empty, dimly lit corridor through the optical sights of his heavy crossbow. He monitored the man's precise location through the windows and the micro-vibrations of the floor tiles, tracking those heavy combat boots as they marched directly into the center of our prepared electric trap. The scout signaled for his squad to follow him. He advanced another 3 meters, placing his full body weight directly onto the densest cluster of conductive vines hidden beneath the rubble. He locked eyes with Micah and gave a sharp tactical nod, prompting her to violently throw the mechanical switch and discharge all the energy stored in the batteries directly into the organic network. 200 volts of raw electricity surged through the conductive plant sap, instantly amplifying the neurotoxin charge and hitting the scout with a devastating technobiological hybrid attack. The human target convulsed violently as the current locked his muscles and the accelerated toxin paralyzed his nervous system, dropping him to the concrete floor without so much as a single warning cry. His muscle spasms generated immense kinetic friction against the specialized extraction thorns he had hidden beneath the nettles, initiating an automatic harvesting protocol upon his paralyzed body. The system tore through his tactical gear and penetrated his flesh, rapidly draining his biological fluids and sending a massive surge of 2.5 biomass units to his depleted reserves. His digital currency skyrocketed to 2.5 units of biomass. This completely reversed his economic deficit, providing him with overwhelming tactical capital to continue the rest of the confrontation. The rest of the looter squad halted their advance at the edge of the corridor, watching in absolute horror as their point man was systematically drained by the electrified, glowing vegetation. Their tactical discipline shattered upon witnessing a scene that defied their entire understanding of physics and biology, forcing them into an aggressive retreat. He now possessed a massive resource surplus and a fully integrated technical subordinate, which meant he no longer needed to hide in a single room and could expand his absolute control throughout the entire tower. He ordered the main armored vine to lunge forward down the hallway to hunt the retreating squad, turning his defensive posture into a highly profitable predatory expansion of his new territory. His biomass reserve stabilized at 2.67 units after the departure of a large number of the enemy squads. Draining the hostile scout had provided a massive capital surplus that fundamentally changed his local tactical options, and the remaining looters rushed down the concrete stairs, abandoning their offensive push after witnessing the fatal electrocution of their point man. Mika stared with wide eyes at the shriveled corpse wrapped in those green extraction vines, processing the absolute lethality of their combined technological and biological defensive network. He projected a blunt order demanding they immediately exploit the enemy's retreat, proposing a synchronized vertical clearing operation to secure the top 5 floors of the structure. She understood the logic perfectly and grabbed a heavy crowbar from her toolbox, indicating she would handle physically opening the jammed doors while he managed the organic threats. We see them establish a strict division of labor where his biological systems would execute localized objectives, while her mechanical expertise manipulated the inorganic factors of the environment. He assigned 0.5 units of biomass to mutate a cluster of toxic puffball mushrooms, designed to release highly concentrated paralytic spores upon detecting violent air movement. His remaining balance dropped to 2.17 units, but the investment produced 12 volatile spore charges which he detached and handed to his new subordinate. A little later, they descended to the 19th floor through the window opening. He stayed in the elevator shaft, using his thick transport vines as a secure rappel rope to avoid the unstable concrete steps damaged in previous fights. The 19th floor corridor was pitch black, forcing Mika to connect a salvaged halogen work light directly to a lithium battery pack. Portable light she carried in her backpack. She aimed the heavy lamp down the hallway and flipped the switch, flooding the concrete space with an intense artificial light that revealed hundreds of mutated spiders. The arachnids hissed aggressively, but he immediately deployed 2 constricting vines to crush the nearest targets, converting their biological mass into 0.1 units of pure energy. This immediate demonstration of overwhelming force psychologically dominated the entire spider colony, causing them to retreat into the ventilation ducts and cede the entire floor to their control. We see them begin to advance methodically. Mika used her crowbar to force open sealed office doors, while he extended sensory tendrils out ahead, mapping the structural layout and identifying any potential ambush points. Most of the office cubicles contained only the skeletal remains of corporate employees, providing a small but steady flow of 0.15 units per corpse. As they cleared the floor, Mika located the main electrical closet and began tearing heavy copper wiring from the walls, which was essential for expanding their network of electrical traps throughout the new territory. He calculated their progress and realized that systematically clearing and harvesting all 5 floors would yield approximately 10.0 units of biomass, even before counting any large monsters. This massive influx of capital would allow him to execute heavy mutations and build the specialized biological production facilities necessary to create a completely self-sufficient ecosystem. And so, they opened the final door on the 19th floor. The first thing they saw was a massive mutated centipede coiled in the corner, which immediately lunged forward with its venomous mandibles snapping loudly. He reacted instantly, tossing one of the paralytic spore charges directly into its path. The creature inhaled it deeply while charging, causing its entire nervous system to seize up violently. It fell to the floor paralyzed but still alive, allowing him to apply his extraction thorns directly to its massive body and drain an incredible 4.0 units of biomass. This single harvest instantly doubled his available capital, raising his balance to 6.27 units and giving him the resources to finally start building permanent border defenses. He ordered his main vine to extend down the central staircase, weaving its armored body into a dense and impenetrable wall of hardened wood, completely sealing off the 18th floor. This maneuver consumed 1.0 units of biomass, but it established a hard physical border that no land creature could cross without heavy explosive ammunition to tear it apart. Next, he sealed the elevator shafts with a thick web of symbiotic vines, razor-sharp to automatically trap and dissect anything attempting a vertical ascent through the mechanical shafts. The elevator trap cost 0.7 units to build, but its passive lethality and zero maintenance requirements made it an incredibly efficient, long-term investment for the construction of their base. His balance now sat at 4.57 units as he analyzed the remaining structural weaknesses of our newly expanded 5-story fortress, identifying the exterior windows as a key vulnerability. Although the armored vine protected our main base, the 4 lower floors remained completely exposed to aerial attacks from mutated birds or climbing infiltrators using specialized equipment. And here we see the complexity of the situation as the threats from the surrounding volcanic landscape began to loom larger in his mind. Well, we all knew this moment would come, where the most skilled survivors must prepare for the inevitable day of combat against the elements. It was a test of strength, perhaps the greatest challenge someone of his age had ever faced in this broken world. Now, while acid traps might have seemed unnecessary to some, Mika questioned the expense, suggesting they use salvage materials to build mechanical shutters. But he replied that biological turrets could self-replicate and heal from damage, a much better choice, to be honest. His long-term strategy focused on exponential growth and self-sufficiency, meaning that investing in living systems capable of spreading was always the mathematically soundest decision. He authorized the mutation and watched as a small green seedling sprouted from the floor, growing rapidly into a thick vine that produced hard-shelled pods resembling organic machine gun nests. He designated the 17th floor as our primary agricultural zone, using its large open office space to build a series of hydroponic bays for cultivation of edible plant matter. He spent 0.5 units to grow a network of nutrient-rich fungal beds across the floor, which would serve as the primary substrate for the plants. Meanwhile, Mika had completely repaired the building's water pump system, cannibalizing parts from 3 different floors and giving us access to a constant, if non-potable, water source. She built a rudimentary filtration system using salvaged sand and charcoal which, combined with his biological purifiers, could produce enough drinking water for a small army of people. Mika, in just her first year of studies, had become essential. Their combined efforts had transformed the plant life into a living water pump system. The isolated apartment had been transformed into a functional multi-level biomechanical factory, capable of producing its own food, water, and defensive weaponry. We now controlled a completely self-sufficient vertical fortress, but our rapid expansion had generated a massive amount of acoustic and thermal energy, easily detectable from the outside. His sensory network registered the return of the hostile leader, who was now watching our fortified tower from the opposite building. With a mixture of pure fury and desperation, he no longer saw our base as a simple resource cache, but as a rival territorial power that had systematically annihilated his elite assault squad without taking a single direct physical hit. His strategic calculation had shifted from a simple smash-and-grab operation to a mindset of a prolonged siege. As he began calling for reinforcements and heavy equipment from his main base over the radio, he intercepted the encrypted radio transmission using a modified vine capable of detecting electromagnetic frequencies, but he lacked the technical knowledge to decipher the complex digital signal. Mika, however, immediately recognized the protocol as a standard military frequency-hopping algorithm and began writing a decryption script on her salvaged laptop. The raw data stream revealed that Ruji was the leader of a much larger faction known as the Iron Vultures, who controlled a significant portion of the downtown commercial district with over 100 men. They possessed salvaged military hardware, including 2 armored personnel carriers and a limited supply of high-explosive charges that could easily breach our walls. Against his reinforced organic barricades, the decrypted transmissions indicated that Ruji was requesting a large-scale mobilization of his entire force to besiege our tower and reclaim the honor he lost during his failed assault. This new intelligence fundamentally altered his threat assessment. The information regarding the Iron Vultures interested him most, as his fortress was designed to repel small-scale incursions, not a prolonged military siege by a heavily armed faction. A direct confrontation with over 100 armed men was mathematically impossible to win with his current biomass reserves and defensive assets, which were already stretched to their absolute limit. He immediately halted all non-essential biological construction and diverted every available unit of biomass toward the rapid replication of automated IV shooter pods in every exterior window. The cost of deploying a full defensive screen across 5 entire floors was a staggering 12.0 biomass units, which meant he was operating with a fatal resource deficit of 9 units. He needed to acquire a massive amount of organic material quickly, so he ordered the central armored vine to breach the lower barricade and extend into the dark, unexplored streets. It was an incredibly high-risk maneuver, as it exposed his primary combat asset to unknown threats. But his only other option was to passively wait for inevitable annihilation by the enemy's siege. The armored vine pierced through the hardened wood of the 18th floor barricade and descended rapidly using the exterior wall as a guide until its tip reached the cracked asphalt of the ground below. At that moment, he shifted his sensory perspective to the vine. Sensing the damp, acidic air of the city level, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. Under the streetlights, he detected the overwhelming scent of decay and uncontrolled, mutated biological growth all around him. The ground was a chaotic jungle of razor-sharp grass and predatory flowers that bit at his armored skin with snapping petals as he began to sweep the area in search of high-value biomass targets. He soon detected the thermal signature of a large herbivore hidden within the shell of a rusted city bus, and he immediately ordered the vine to tear apart the corroded metal frame to reach the creature within the city's skeleton. The mutated deer was the size of a small car, and its terrified flight instinct drove it to charge directly into the extraction thorns waiting on his deployed hunting appendage. He drained the massive creature in less than 30 seconds, flooding his system with an incredible 15.0 units of fresh biomass and instantly resolving his immediate production deficit. His balance skyrocketed to 19.57 units, giving him more than enough capital to allow the tower to shift its capabilities. And so, over time, he managed to reposition the tower and prepare a series of devastating surprises for Ruji and his approaching army. He called back the armored vine and immediately began the mass production of IV shooter pods, spending 12 units to create a network of 600 automated turrets covering every single window. Each pod contained 3 poisonous darts capable of penetrating tactical armor and delivering a fast-acting neurotoxin that would paralyze a human target in less than 10 seconds of exposure. His balance dropped to 7.57 units, but the fortress was now quite literally a porcupine of defensive biological firepower, capable of unleashing a volley of 1,800 projectiles. Mika had successfully decrypted the enemy's logistical plans, revealing that their primary assault would begin in exactly 6 hours, using the pre-dawn darkness to advance with their heavy armor. They planned to use armored transport vehicles as mobile shields to absorb the initial volley of the battle. Mika kept her distance from their teams, as their defense units were quite capable, while their infantry breached the lobby with high-explosive demolition charges. This intelligence allowed him to formulate a direct counter-strategy, investing 4.0 units into mutating the ground floor routes to secrete a highly flammable organic resin across the street. His plan was to lure their armored vehicles into the resin-slicked kill zone, and then have Mika ignite the entire area with a modified crossbow bolt, tipped with a salvaged magnesium flare. The resulting inferno would melt the vehicle's rubber tires and cook the infantry inside, turning their main tactical advantage into a massive rolling metal coffin of their own design. We spent the next 5 hours meticulously preparing our coordinated techno-organic trap, laying electrical cables, and positioning my flammable resin with absolute precision across the street. The final piece of my strategy involved a high-risk psychological operation, designed to shatter Ruji's command structure before the main battle even began, using my unique biological assets. He spent 1.0 units to engineer a parasitic fungus capable of perfectly mimicking human vocal cords and replicating with 100% accuracy any voice he had heard before. He attached the vocalizing fungus to a captured mutated bat and released it into the night air, instructing it to fly directly to the enemy command post. The bat landed silently on the windowsill of Ruji's office and began to speak with the perfect voice of his recently deceased second-in-command, whom he had interrogated and consumed earlier. The phantom voice echoed in the dark room, accusing Ruji of incompetence and cowardice for leading his best men into a death trap from which only he escaped alive. Ruji screamed in a mixture of terror and fury, firing his secondary weapon blindly at the shadows. At that moment, the tension shifted as the hero detached himself from the house, moving toward Ruji's location. He left the safety of his home and headed straight for Ruji's base. His paranoid outburst immediately drew the attention of his subordinates, who now saw their supposedly fearless leader breaking down mentally before an invisible Psychological enemy. The morale of the entire Iron Vulture faction was critically compromised as rumors began to spread that the Green Tower was not just a fortress, but a haunted place that had become a site of psychological warfare. This single investment of one unit in psychological warfare had already generated a much greater return than any physical trap by striking the enemy's most critical and fragile vulnerability. We completed our final preparations and retreated to the command center on the 19th floor to monitor the approaching enemy formation through Mika's network of repurposed security cameras. His biomass reserve remained at a steady 2.57 units, a dangerously low margin. But he had invested everything in a single decisive gamble that would bring either total victory or certain death. Securing the top 5 floors required a complete restructuring of his resource management strategy, since expanding his controlled territory instantly multiplied his daily biomass consumption rate. His interface showed a base maintenance drain of 0.4 units per day just to sustain the central vine and the security unit. As for the extended mycelium sensory network in the newly captured levels, Mika presented an additional metabolic drain, requiring complex carbon structures and clean hydration, which meant he had to design a sustainable ecosystem instead of relying solely on aggressive hunting. We see them establish the main command center on the 19th floor, using the intact executive suites as a safe living space while dedicating the lower levels entirely to resource production. The most critical immediate deficiency, however, was a reliable supply of biomass. The age of the extended mycelium sensory network was a disaster regarding water because the municipal pipes had been dry for months and his new biological assets required a high liquid intake for cell division. He took Mika to the eastern balcony, where the wind currents carried intense morning humidity, calculating that a localized condensation trap could produce enough liquid to sustain our combined operations. He spent 1.2 biomass units to mutate a cluster of broad-leaved ferns, increasing their surface area by 300% per biomass unit. Mika, being the first of her kind, went without a biomass treatment. Mika's age reached 100%, forcing her epidermis to secrete a cooling organic gel. This thermal manipulation caused the ambient humidity in the air to condense rapidly over the enormous green surfaces, accumulating into heavy droplets that rolled down specialized, grooved central stems. Mika used her mechanical toolkit to repurpose a rusty plastic rain barrel from a neighboring apartment, cutting a hole in the lid and aligning it perfectly under the dripping stems of the ferns. Mika tore several meters of PVC pipe from the destroyed bathroom and created a gravity-fed plumbing line that directed the water, harvested directly into a sealed reservoir in the bathtub of our safe zone. Our new automated system collected approximately 50 liters of potable water every 24 hours, completely resolving our hydration problem and providing the liquid base for his agricultural projects. With the water supply finally secured, we see him move on to the next major test of his biomass technology. The first logistical priority was to establish a stable internal production cycle to offset the massive maintenance costs of our expanding defensive infrastructure. He designated the entire 18th floor as a centralized decomposition factory, dragging the corpses of every mutated creature they had killed into the open office space. He spent 2.5 biomass units to engineer a highly aggressive species of mycelium, specialized in rapidly breaking down complex biomass proteins. The second priority was to decompose the corpses into a sort of fungal carpet and convert them into raw liquid nutrients. His remaining balance dropped to 1.47 units, but the fungal carpet quickly consumed the rotting carcasses and generated a steady passive income of 0.3 units per day. This decomposition engine transformed our vertical fortress into a closed-loop ecosystem, a rather clever solution, to be honest. In this cycle, every defeated enemy was systematically recycled into the fuel necessary to kill the next one. Now possessing a stable surplus of water and energy, he could finally focus on creating a sustainable food source for Mika, who, unfortunately, could not metabolize the raw nutrient paste produced by his system. He accessed the genetic archive and crossed the DNA of a terrestrial potato with nutrient-rich aquatic algae to create a hyper-efficient photosynthetic food source. The system required 0.6 units to synthesize the first generation of these bioengineered tubers, which would mature in less than 72 hours. Once planted in the fungal beds, Mika watched this mutation process with intense technical curiosity, asking detailed questions about ribonucleic acid sequencing and the protein folding mechanics of his symbiotic system. Her sharp, analytical mind quickly grasped the fundamental principles of his biological engineering, allowing her to suggest inorganic improvements that could actually accelerate his cellular manipulations. She proposed integrating a network of salvaged ultraviolet grow lamps directly into the fungal beds, which, in theory, would double the photosynthetic production of his new potato algae hybrids. He immediately accepted this tactical synergy, and they spent the next 8 hours tearing fluorescent fixtures from office ceilings and rewiring them to her generator. The combined cost of food synthesis and power grid expansion reduced his biomass reserve to a mere 0.87 units. But the long-term benefit was mathematically undeniable, a calculated risk that, to be honest, was bound to pay off. As for the potato hybrids, we see the first harvest of bright green tubers emerge as they activate the ultraviolet lamps, flooding the agricultural bay with a potent purple light to stimulate rapid growth. With our basic survival needs finally automated, he at last had the economic freedom to expand our defensive perimeter and create specialized biological weapons. He assigned 0.3 units to mutate the Ivy shooters, upgrading their standard neurotoxin darts into a much more lethal variant. This new strain was designed to induce rapid cellular necrosis upon the slightest contact. This upgrade significantly increased the lethality of our automated turrets, ensuring any human target hit by a single dart would be completely incapacitated within 3 seconds. Not stopping there, he also invested 0.2 units into reinforcing the exterior windows of the entire floor.